Tamara LaRue was 15 years old. She was a troubled teenager. One day, she took a gun her mother had and put it against her chest, and she pulled the trigger. Her body was rushed to the hospital, but she said her soul went somewhere else.
And I realized I was not in hell because I shot myself. Because no act can take you to hell as if no act can take you to heaven. We are saved by faith.
Yeah, okay.
And so I realized that I wasn't there by my actions. I was there because I didn't receive Jesus as my Lord. I was convinced that there was no way to live a completely happy life. And if I couldn't live happy, I didn't want to live at all. It began with a divorce, a broken home. And I believe that through that, my mentality began to form and began to develop a sense of rejection because I didn't understand. I was a small child and didn't understand adult things. And so I felt the breakup was all about me. That sense of rejection just really grew. I began to perceive myself as a burden to other people. And so I would take little bitty comments that were relatively insignificant. I would make it into a really big deal. Those little seeds in my life, I began meditating on over and over. And as I grew, the rejection began to grow. What is wrong with me? And so I believe that the only answer for me was to end my life. I walked to my mother's room thinking I don't want anyone to see me because I'm so determined to end my life, to end the void, to end the suffering, to end the loneliness, that nothing was going to stop me. I began crying out and I began screaming out to God, God, forgive me. And the gun went off. My lungs began to fill up with blood. My ears, I began to become deaf, very slowly, faintly become deaf. My eyes became blind. My eyes were open and I became blinded, and I knew that death was gripping my soul. And then all of a sudden, I felt myself, my soul, leave my body, and I instantly began falling and falling. And at that moment, I knew I was no longer in control of my destiny. And I ended up in a place that was complete torment. And my body was burning. I no longer was lonely. I was no longer depressed. I became depression. I became loneliness. I became a tormented being of fear. And as I began looking out and I saw all of these other people and everybody was screaming in pain, the mutual thing that everyone shared there was their desire to scream out to everybody on earth, do not come here. Acknowledge that life is about Jesus Christ. Eternity is real, and hell is real, and heaven is real, and how you live your life will determine where you go. And everybody cried out that their loved ones would hear the truth. I saw the hand of God literally come down, and at that moment I knew that he was coming for me, and his hand picked me up. And instantaneously, I was no longer a being of tormented sin. I now was a being cleansed, and God took me over the heavens. It was beyond peaceful and gorgeous and magnificent. However, I was not allowed to stay, and I was certainly not allowed to see anything specific, but I was able to feel his presence in his entirety. I was able to feel perfect serenity. I was able to feel joy for the first time, complete, whole joy. And this hand just began to bring me back into the universe. And I saw myself coming back to my home and went through the ceiling, and the hand just went and placed me gently back into my physical body. And he went up, and I opened my eyes, and I saw him go up. And instantly, I knew at that moment, God loved me. I called out on his name, and I asked for him to forgive me, and he did. And at that moment, I was given a spiritual strength that I had never known. I was given joy that I had never had. I was given peace that I knew would take me through what I was about to face. The bullet had missed my heart by less than a fourth of an inch. I mean, just, by millimeters there, and had explained that, the pressure of a 38 caliber gun should have exploded my heart. And they didn't understand that there was nothing wrong with me. It broke a few of my ribs, and that was all.
That was a 38 police special.
Yes.
Your mother had in her drawer.
Pat, when I pulled that trigger, I knew my body was dying. I felt the blood rushing through my lungs. Death gripped my body. I became blind. I became deaf. And as my soul left my body, I began traveling faster than the speed of light. And I began falling and falling and falling. And all of a sudden, this explosion happened on the inside of me. It was as if there was like a sulfuric type acid burn that consumed me in every way. It was so hideous and terrifying. There are no words to describe the level of pain and the type of burn that I was experiencing.
What was it?
It was hell, Pat. It was what the Bible describes as hell. It was the fire of hell. And when I looked around, not only was I in a place of death, but I now had become death. I was no longer in a place where there was peace. I was in a place of total torment.
Were you terrified?
I had become fear.
Oh, you've become fear.
I had become a being of fear. The Bible describes that death is the absence of God.
Yeah.
And so in the absence of God, in the absence of anything good, your soul actually transforms into a being of fear, which is the opposite of love. So my being, my person turned into a being of fear, a being of pain, a being in total isolation.
There wasn't anybody else around you.
Pat, I could look out and I could see thousands, millions of people that were all around me, but I was unable to communicate with them.
Was it like a lake? Was it molten?
It was like I don't know that it was like a lake. There was it's hard to describe. I guess you could say it was like, it was a huge sea of people. Yes, and there were many, many chambers that were all around me. And all of the people that were there were in the same formless being, screaming out in agony, in total terror, in a hideous scream. Then there was no end to it, Pat. There are no words to describe how horrific this was.
They were screaming in agony.
They were screaming in agony, and because they had become total beings of death. Yeah. And that's hard for the physical mind to understand those things. But when I would look at it, I remember looking at an individual, particularly, and they were as close to me as you are. And when I saw them, Pat, I knew everything about them. I knew every sin they had committed. I knew my knowledge about their life was completely full. I knew everything they had done wrong. I knew their thoughts. I knew their emotions. I knew the will. I knew everything I could think upon. My wisdom was in its fullness. It was like a Harvard degree instantly, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter. In that hideous state of a burning torment, the only knowledge that mattered was that Jesus Christ was Lord. And here I am in this state of agony, indescribable agony, and the only thing that mattered was that I never surrendered to the Lordship of Jesus Christ.
Was this like regret in your mind as part of that fear?
Absolutely regret. There was so much regret and shame and guilt that I had believed a lie and that I had believed the deceit. There was no end. No end. And you could look across the Gulf expanse and you could see heaven. You could see the peace, the joy, the love, the wholeness. And you knew you were never going to experience that because time does not exist in eternity. Time does not exist at all. And so you know you are there forever with no relief. The burn will never stop. The screaming will never stop. And the only thing you can do is hope that no one else will come where you are. But you know, Pat, what is so amazing is God's love was so incredible that before I actually shot myself, I cried out to God to forgive me. And in that cry of desperation of forgiveness, God heard me. And He is so faithful to His word and to His promise that in my screaming and in my agony and in the revelation of what I experienced, God came down from heaven and this hand scooped me up, Pat, and picked me up. And I realized I was not in hell because I shot myself. Because no act can take you to hell as if no act can take you to heaven. We are saved by faith.
Yeah, okay.
And so I realized that I wasn't there by my actions. I was there because I didn't receive Jesus as my Lord. And when I went over that and I entered into God's presence, Pat, now, you can't describe God's presence either, but it was love. And I had now left a place of death and torment and darkness. And now I had entered into a place of love and light. And I experienced God's wholeness. I experienced His grace and His mercy. And there was unity with Christ that is indescribable. My pain was gone. My torment was gone.
So the people were talking.
Oh yes, they were all communicating. However, I was restricted.
You were?
I was not allowed to take part in any of that. Although I knew that was going on and although I saw those things, I was not allowed to take part of that or to see many things in detail. There was many things understood and the knowledge was free and wisdom was free. And so as I traveled over the heavens and I was cleansed of my sin, so I came right back into the roof of my home and they laid my body, the vessel of God laid my body back, my soul back into my body. And when He did that, I instantly could see and hear again. And I knew at that moment, I came back into my home.
You did?
I came back into my home because when I had gone in there, I was isolated. Nobody knew that I had gone in there alone. So I don't know how long exactly I was out of my body. But when I had come back, that was when I had called for my mother to come and help me. And that was when she called the ambulance. They did their work on me in the emergency room, and they put me into a regular room. My recovery was just miraculous. When you leave this earth, you are going to do one or two things. Either you are going to be transformed into a being of sin and torment, or you are going to be transformed into a being of light and love and joy. And it is a personal responsibility who and what you are going to be transformed into. And I had to learn how to take on the responsibility and quit blaming others for my mental and emotional condition. Now I'm full of joy. Now I am full of peace. I am who God says I am. I am loved. I am adopted into the kingdom of Christ. You know, God sees me that I am His child and all that He has is mine. I just have to be able to receive it. And I have to be able to recognize and replace my junk with His greatness. As long as I stand on the promises of God and I allow His presence in my life, I can conquer anything and I can go through my problems with peaceful sleep. I can go with them with joy and strength beyond all comprehension. And I can come out on the other side full of hope and of victory in Christ.